Hello and welcome to Rule of Carnage, a series of conversations between me and Glenn about designing better miniature games. Welcome to this conversation in which we talk about, shockingly, Gaslands. And the reason we're talking about Gaslands is I've been doing some tinkering. Been working on a few expansions, both Gaslands Legacy and a new one that I haven't announced yet. And Glenn and I have been working on another one that we haven't announced yet. There are lots of spoilers I'm going to avoid here. But broadly speaking, there are some things about Gaslands Refueled that are not yet perfect. And so I've just been tinkering around with them and come up with the slightly crackpot idea of releasing a few sort of sellotape over the top experimental rules. You might already have heard us talking about wipeouts. You may have even taken a look at the wipeout experimental rule I published. And in this conversation, we are going to turn our attention to the evade rule, which some might say is the most perfunctory rule in Gaslands. And that, I suppose, is why it bears some consideration. Can we make it less perfunctory? Does it have a brighter, shinier version of itself that is more enjoyable? And as Glenn likes to say, is there more juice in the squeeze than we are currently getting out of it? So I think that's what we're going to talk about. Glenn, do you want to give a minor sort of description / rant about the evade?
Yeah, I mean, the reason people say it's perfunctory is because it is the most perfunctory rule in Gaslands. So in Gaslands, whenever you take some damage, you get the opportunity to roll some d6. The number of d6 you roll is the gear that you're currently in, and on a 6 or more, generally, there's a couple of things that could tweak that number. On a 6 or more, you avoid one of the points of damage that you've just suffered. So you get to evade the damage that came to you.
Can I explain a couple of pieces of rationale behind that set of nonsense?
Sure.
So there are two key pieces. One is the design goal that Gaslands should be explodey. And so one of the things that's actually kind of, it's not super simple to train a gun on someone in Gaslands, and that's intentional. Like the annoying sort of pointing out only out the front firing arc is to represent that it was probably going to be quite difficult to shoot whilst driving a car. So when you land a shot, I sort of wanted it to be meaningful, and I wanted cars to crumple fairly quickly in quite a cartoonish way so that we could get to the exploding part and not spend the entire game worrying about counting hull boxes. That's one. And the second thing is I very much wanted the speed that you are traveling to matter to the evade roll, because there's a ton of rules in Gaslands which are all saying go faster, go faster, go faster, go faster. The faster you go, the better you will do. And so the evade mechanic of rolling a number of dice equal to the speed was a version of telling you the faster you go, the more saving throws you've got. And the reason that it's a 6+, there is a rationale for that buried somewhere very deep in the development of the game. I think it even comes from Hobgoblin, where Hobgoblin had an equally perfunctory saving throw, which I think might have even been a 5 or a 6. And I quite liked the idea that even though the game wanted to be explodey, it should never completely remove the saving throw, because when it completely removed the saving throw, it felt just like someone was flicking your toy cars over. So I tried to find the balance between explodey and some player agency on the other side of the attack. And that's where I ended up.
Now, one of the things that we're sort of coming to in relation to the overall pattern of the tinkering that we're currently engaging in is that Gaslands is explodey. Gaslands is really very explodey, insofar as a lot of people find that they finish out a death race on the last man standing rule rather than the crossing of the last gate rule. Yeah, and again, you know, in our defense, I'd say that this is one of the things that comes with sort of experience and learning and et cetera, and once somebody becomes like a nuanced Miyazaki player, that problem doesn't exist anymore. Not by a long shot, because the person glides over the finish line, you know, before the first turn is out. But for most sort of first-time players, they get the game on the tabletop and they don't get close to anybody going across the finish line. They quite often don't get people hitting the third gate. I've come across clubs where people go, "We never get to gate one. Never happened. We've never seen anyone cross the first gate. Everyone's dead long before that point." And so there is a thing to say, okay, one of the obvious things to do to tweak that a little bit is the evade system. It is essentially there so that you don't just feel like you're getting slapped as other people blow you up, but it's just there to make you feel like you're not getting slapped as other people blow you up. It doesn't really, if people aren't like, oh no, I'm getting shot by like 4 rockets, but luckily evades. Because so the first thing about the evades is, because they're based on the number of dice, number of gears you're in, they're quite often 3 or 4 dice. Because Gaslands is quite a violent death sport, you've quite often got like 8 or 9 hits incoming at you. And it's one thing if you've got 8 or 9 hits coming in with 3 evades and you've got like 10 hull, you're like, okay, it's worth knocking off a couple of those hits. If you've got like 8 hits coming in, you're in 3rd gear and you've got 5 hull, what's the point in evading?
The other interaction that is interesting about that mechanic is the collision system, where you choose to either smash or evade. Right now the decision is very based on basically saying, okay, how fast am I going? How many evade dice am I going to get? Is that anywhere near enough to save me from enough pain to make it worthwhile? And if not, then I'm just always going to smash. So it has the designed desirable result of asking people to smash more often than they don't, which leads to the unintentional emergent pattern of more exploding, particularly collisions being extremely dangerous early game.
By making it such that you can have way more hits incoming that's even worth bothering to roll the dice, it's sort of exponentially doubling the rate at which things get smashed to pieces. Because, well, what's the point in evading? I may as well smash you back. And then places where I probably shouldn't have really been putting damage on you, I am putting damage on you, etc., etc.
And then the other point, sorry to interrupt, the other point that we came to, I guess, quite recently when playtesting again was, we were slightly rusty on the rules. We came to the table. I think I shot you, and you went for a handful of d6 and just naturally picked up a number of d6 equal to the number of hits that you just suffered, because that's how all games do it. And for some reason, Mike decided that you roll a number of dice equal to your skid dice, and so that moment of unintuitive brain ache, I think, pointed the way to an experimental rewrite of this.
And again, and running the game at conventions and demos and demoing it for first-time players, the people are constantly, okay, how many evade dice do I get? And it's your gears. It's always your number of gears. It's always your number of gears. It just doesn't stick with people. It feels like maybe it should stick. It just doesn't. It doesn't lock in people's brains. It's weird. It's an unusual thing to have in games. Normally, it's the number of hits. So the rule that we're poking around at the moment, that we're thinking about, is you roll the number of hits, and then your target number is dependent upon your gears. So it keeps in the nature, the speed you're going at is relevant, but it means it's always theoretically worth rolling evades. You might be shooting for the moon, but at least you're not, trying to square a circle. It's not just pointless, and you may as well sort of retaliate.
And the simplest version of that leaps to mind is, so there's a 6-sided dice and there are 6 gears, and so maybe the faster I'm going, the easier it gets. And so maybe, when I'm in 1st gear, it's a nothing, or it's a 6+, and then by the time I get to 5th or 6th, it's a 2-up, or it's an auto evade. But we don't want auto evades. And then Glenn came up with this intriguing idea of maybe having it go in both directions depending on stuff.
So if we say your target number for your evade is to roll under your gears, for example, that's neat and elegant and swifty, and it means, okay, so in first, sorry, if it's equal to under your gears, in first gear,
under is right. So if you're in first gear, you can't roll under a 1. So you're stuffed. Like bullets are faster than you. And if you're up in gear 6, then you've still got a chance of failing an under the 6 roll, because you could roll a 6 and miss that saving throw.
Now that makes everything more survivable all of the time, which is nice, and it's really quick and elegant. It's a simple thing to remember. It's just under your gears, full stop. That's your target number. But if for shooting it's under your gears, it means that as you're going faster, you're harder to hit with a bullet. And it means that towards the end of the game, where we're getting close to finishing and finally wrapping up after however long we've been playing, somebody doesn't get sniped out from somebody who's double length back, and then we have to play another 3 activations. So that's great. But if it's in relation to collisions, it means that early off the gate collisions are more damaging than late game collisions, where you're both going at your top speed smashing into each other,
which don't make a lick of sense.
Doesn't make much sense, and it encourages people to smash into each other right off the start line, which we don't want to do. That's everything we're trying to move away from with these tweaks and tinkers. So the other option is to go, if you're being shot at, you've got to roll under your gears. If you're in a collision, you've got to roll over your gears, because if you smash into somebody at low speed, you're probably going to be in fight. If you have a 10-mile-an-hour collision, you're not going to end up blown to pieces in a ball of fire.
Yeah, so there is a strange edge here, which is if I collide, if a gear 6 person smashes into me and I'm in gear 1, for some reason they get to throw a lot of dice, but then I get to make a 2-up save against them. So there is a thing still to work out here, but it's like, in purely mechanical terms, it's very elegant.
Yeah, and there is a certain logic to say, like, okay, if I was going slow enough, I had enough. I essentially.
I mean, it's called an evade. It's not called
a
mechanical. It's not called a crumple save. It's an evade.
Yes. Yeah, and so I suppose the place we're at the moment is whether or not the squeeze of going, okay, you've got going in different direction target numbers depending on what you're doing is worth the juice of. It makes the game finish off quicker, in a more satisfying manner, stops people from sitting out early on, and tells a story that makes sense given what's happening to you most of the time, apart from the instances where somebody's going at 10 miles an hour has been smashed into by somebody going at 80 miles an hour in a head-on collision, and for some reason goes, didn't even touch me, wasn't even an issue.
Why is the physics of collisions so brutally difficult to write rules for, Glenn?
I mean, it's funny because when we sort of first were going through Gaslands, the actual real-world physics of collisions don't in any way fit with game logic. This is something we've talked about in other videos, where if I hit you, I should get an advantage. And the fact that in Gaslands, if I hit you, you hit me back exactly as hard, as I hit you, infuriates people repeatedly. I meet people furious about that. And is, despite the fact that it's the way that reality works, really hard to get to wrap your head around for some peculiar reason.
Exactly. Look, I punched the wall, so I should get an advantage. That wall should suffer. And the other thing about this tinkering here is that, like, the rolling under your gears thing, it drives me bananas that you would have to roll high to hit something, and then you would have to roll low to save it. Like, that just, I just don't like it. It happens in some other games, and I get cross about it there. It might be that I can live with that, but that does make me, it's aesthetically unpleasant to me.
So there's a tertiary version of the rules, which is for possibly Mike's benefit alone, which is you go to a little table, and the little table says, if you're being shot at, you're rolling under your gears. If you're in a collision, you're rolling under 8 minus your gears.
But you wouldn't have to know the 8 minus your gears. It's just like, if I'm going slowly, slow is better, then I'm likely to get a 2 save or a 3 save because I'm in gear 1 or gear 2. It's imperfect, but it's like a table you'd have to memorize, but the memorizing of that table is very intuitive because of the way that it balances out. In some respects, looking at a table, memorizing it, and then becoming intuitively connected with it is sort of how Warhammer close combat tables work. Like, they aren't mathematical. You don't calculate the result. You simply intuit the result from a couple of sort of basic heuristics.
Yeah, and so this is one of the things that possibly is going to sort of be shaking out in when this goes live and out to the community and finding people's opinions, because I mean, personally, I never learned a table in Warhammer in my life. I always learned the rule behind that generated the table, and then use that to generate the results. I don't, I think I looked at the tables in each edition of Warhammer once as I read through the rules and flicked past, checking nothing had changed, and then went back to, well, my target number for shooting is 7 minus my ballistic skill, and then with modifiers to it. I never once looked at the shooting table in the Warhammer rulebook. That just seems like a route to insanity. Why would one do such a thing? It's
right, but there was always another way of doing it, which I think is an equally common way, which was to say the common ballistic skill is 3. It's a 4 up, which is a sensible halfway point. So an average dice roll for an average ballistic skill. And so if I'm ballistic skill 4, it gets a little bit easier. If I'm ballistic skill 2, it gets a little bit harder. And people, I think lots of people have, myself as well, had a heuristic approach, not a mathematical approach to a target number. And I think they're both valid. And I just don't know what's the most broadly acceptable to players.
Yeah,
and in a way, the table and maybe explaining the logic behind the table serves both audiences, because you give the physicists the ability to derive it from first principles, and you give the artists the way to just feel it out through, like, oh, it's a little bit more darker in color than a ballistic skill 3.
Yeah, I mean, possibly. Yeah, it might just be one of these things where going, it's either over or under your gears, depending on which sort of collision you're in, has the sort of, might be the rules designer's favorite, but no player's favorite, because it's sort of, well, it's rather elegant.
And I'll give you the very specific reason. Like, to this day, I cannot play the flip check rule. My brain rejects that rule. I cannot. Normally, what happens when I flip is I roll a dice, and then somebody else at the table will tell me whether I flipped or not. Because 2 things are going on with that flip check, which make it doubly confusing. One is that you have to roll low, I think, to pass the flip check. But the other thing is that you quite often want to fail the flip check. So wanting to fail to roll low is like too many negatives for me. And so my brain just goes, no, don't know how to do that rule. And so I just need to be really honest with myself about, like, that is a piece of the Gaslands game that I hate. I just despise it. I can't understand it. I don't know what it is. It's alien to me. And there's another way of writing that rule, which is simply roll a dice, add your current speed. If it's above a number, then you flip. And that actually seems way more intuitive to me. And that's what we'll put in the wipeout rules as well, just to test it, to see whether that was good. But do you see what I mean?
No, I know. I do see what you mean, and it's one of the things with the flip check rule myself. The way I remember it is, the faster you're going, you're more likely you are to flip. I do have to tell myself the narrative story each time. It's like, righty tighty lefty loosey when you're doing screws. I have to say that to myself every single time I do up a nut or a bolt.
I know, but if the better at shooting you are in Warhammer 40,000, the easier it is to roll, then the translation of that is, oh, I've got a 2 up or I've got a 3 up. Whereas in this, it's backwards, where it's like, okay, the faster I go, the more likely I am to flip, but more likely means now it's a 5 negative or a 6 negative, which is like just upside down to the way that dice systems normally work. And I think that you can do that, like in A Billion Suns, where you say everything rolls low. But I think if you insert little random moments of no, lower is better. It's like swapping the meaning of the ace in the middle of a card game. Like, it's just baffling.
I know, I know what you mean. I do know what you mean, and I'm not saying you're in any level that you're wrong here. It's weird to me that needing to remember that. So what the flip check would then be is roll a dice, add your gears to it. If the result is over, so I'm sure we tried that rule, and I seem to remember there was a reason why we didn't do it, but I can't currently remember what it is because somebody suggested it.
Yeah, I mean, we'll put it back on the table, and if there's a gremlin lurking under the covers there, we'll likely find it again. But yeah, I mean,
it's just I guess it's weird to me that needing to remember a number in order to be able to use the rule is more natural than just remembering that it's under or over the gears. You know, remembering that target number of 8 feels like it's actual memorization. It's that you can't remember an actual number, and if you don't remember that number, there are no rules or heuristics or stories or anything you can do. You need that number. It is the key, and without the key, you're just boned. Whereas with rolling under your gears, you don't remember any numbers. You just have to remember the story. Just remember the tale. You're going fast.
Maybe, because the problem with that rule is somebody is going to say, wait, was it under or equal or under? And then everyone will have to sit around and go, oh, I wonder what the designer's intention was. Are you supposed to always be able to flip, or sometimes should you not be able to flip? Oh, I can't remember. We'll have to go and look it up. Is it under or equal or under?
That's not going to change when people go, is it equal to the target number of 8 or over the target number of 8? That's not going to change even slightly by putting in the new target number version. That has nothing to do with it whatsoever.
Is it over 8? I mean, the only benefit there is that target numbers are fairly well understood beasts.
I mean,
maybe that's the role player in me.
Possibly. I mean, I would say that you are as likely in any given rule system to find it say you need 7+ as it is to say you need to roll 8, or because 7+ is the same as rolling more than 6. And I think you're as likely to find it saying you need to roll more than a 6 as you are to find it saying you need to roll 7+. So
the other thing here, which I hadn't considered, but the one place that really doesn't bother me, and this might just be like just pure exposure. There's a thing in Kill Team. Is it Kill Team or is it Necromunda, where you have to roll high to hit, high to wound, and then low to like to do an armor, to do like a wounding roll or a pinning roll or something, and that really annoys me. Roll a d6, roll an anti-d6. That doesn't make any sense. But the leadership roll, the leadership test in all editions of Warhammer has never really bothered me, because you roll 2 dice, and the 2 dice is like, it's got a different affordance, and the only time that you go under in these games is when you're rolling 2 dice. 1 dice, or like a dice pool, you're always looking for over. Special magic 2 dice goes under. So there is another version of this. I'm not sure I'm advocating this, where flip checks are 2d6, and the reason that flip checks go low is that you roll 2d6, and that's a thing. But it doesn't work for the evades.
in relation to Warhammer, and to be fair, this is true for Gaslands as well. What's interesting is that when Warhammer would be reversing the direction of the dice, what it does is it hands over the duties of rolling. So you need to roll high to hit, you need to roll high to wound, and then you need to roll low in order to hurt somebody on their armor save. And so rather than having you roll their armor save and needing to roll low, you hand the dice across the table, and the other person continues to have to roll high. And that keeps that sort of, it's always about rolling high whenever you roll a dice, despite the fact that the last dice roll is stopping what the previous 2 dice rolls were meant to do. And that seems in many ways, I think, more intuitive. And I suppose the question there is almost like, okay, do you hand the dice across the table and make somebody else make the flip check? Because then it'll make way more sense to them that they're trying to make you flip, and so they're trying to roll over your gears. The only reason you're trying to roll under your gears is you don't want to flip. And if flips are damaging and people out of position. And so you say, okay, you resolve my wipeout. You spin me because you've always spun me. You roll the dice to find out if I flip, and you want to roll high because you want me to flip. That would be doing the equivalent of handing the dice over for an armor save, and that would mean that you're always trying to roll high. It's the thing that's counterintuitive with the flip is that you roll your own flip, and in theory, you want to roll low and not flip. And as you said, it really bakes your brain when you go, oh, but today, that extra medium forwards is advantageous to me. So today, I want to do the thing that I'm not meant to want to do, and I want to get a nice high dice roll. So, I mean,
coming back to the evade check, like, I guess, I don't know, I can't immediately see a way of doing that where you want to roll high numbers. You want to roll high numbers for what? For shooting. And no, so sorry, for smashing. And then for shooting, currently you want to roll low numbers. So we need to hand the evade dice over to the shooter in order to.
I mean, it makes a certain sense in that in shooting, the other guy is rolling the dice that he's firing at you, and then he picks them up again, and then he makes the saves, or non-evades for you. And it also makes a certain sense because you always evade with shooting. You don't always evade with smash attacks. So he will always he doesn't have to ask your permission. He just rolls them and rolls them again, and then tells you how many wounds you're taking. So there is
which somehow begs the question of, like, if you were going to put the evade roll into the hands of the shooter, why not bake that probability into the shooting roll in the first place? And instead of having an evade roll, break out the way that smash attacks and shooting attacks work, and find some way to bake the speed into the accuracy of the weapon.
Yeah, I mean,
have it resolve in a single. But the reason that we have to hits into wounds is because you want some element of, like, my skill and then your defensiveness. But actually in Gaslands there's almost no modification to the skill of the shooter. So the skill of the shooter is a flat probabilistic insertion with the minor bubbles of Rutherford skills and stuff. So you could potentially reset the shooting mechanic to be sensitive to gears.
Yeah, so shooting is just you roll more than their gears to hit them, and if you hit them, they take wounds. Full stop.
Right. So yeah, what gear are you in? 1. Yeah. Cool. I only needed 2 up to hit you. What gear are you in? 6. I can't hit you.
And frankly, it wouldn't wildly change the probabilities from the current. It's always 4+ to hit, and then always 6+ to hit. It's the 6+ to hit at the moment is so perfunctory that it doesn't really change anything. So
would you make things invulnerable in gear 6, or would you just say 6 is always hit?
I mean, currently the
gear 6 is mad anyway. No one's going to shoot you in 6. I mean, it means that 2 people moving in 6 couldn't shoot each other,
which would be completely accurate and realistic to the world, wouldn't it? I mean,
right, which would also have a little thing about, like, oh, so you can shoot as many times as you activate. That's weird. Well, actually, the number of times that you activate, your shooting gets poorer and poorer. So that has an interesting effect.
Yeah, providing you're continuing to shoot at somebody who's continuing to activate. If you're continuing to activate and you're shooting some poor slob who wiped out in gear phase 1, and you're shooting,
that's true.
you just as you go past him, and he's like, wow, you should be getting less accurate as you're driving around at 80 miles an hour. Should, but aren't. So,
yeah, because then if we flip that round, this has gone to a strange place. Then we flip that round onto smash attack.
This is live development, people.
Then it's essentially like, well, how smashy my smashes are. Yeah, it could be the same mechanic. It could be I roll more dice because I'm moving fast, but those dice are more difficult to register hits because you are moving fast, slow.
I mean, yeah, the way we were talking about is, if I'm moving fast, I essentially get to roll more dice. If I am shooting at you because you are also moving fast, it's really hard to hit you. If I'm shooting at you when you're stopped, I'm just machine gunning, some poor non-moving target, and I hit you more times because I'm moving faster, and I hit you more times because you're not moving faster.
I mean,
the thing to do, and this is where you're starting to sort of melt brains, is the shooting save is the shooting is dependent on whoever has the highest gear between the shooter and the shootee. So if I'm shooting at you while I'm in 6th and you're in 1st, it's really hard for me to hit you. If you're shooting at me while I'm in 6th and you're in 1st, it's really hard for you to hit me. The only time that it's really easy for me to hit you with shooting is when we're both in 1st and we're just tootling on at 10 miles an hour as I machine gun into the side of your car.
Well, no, I mean, I think, yeah. Anyway, all right, that's super interesting. I think what we're going to have to do is finish this conversation on evades and go and scratch out 2 new versions of evades where, in some regards, we melt evade rolls down into slag and bake them back into the hit rolls.
Again, I do think one of the things that's interesting in this, and hopefully it's interesting to other people, is a lot of what people I think are seeing in this video is a lot of the conversations that we went through in the original genesis of Gaslands, and a lot of the times we're coming to a lot of the same conclusions we came first time around. I think personally, what might be different this time is a bit of a different set of design principles, possibly. And this is something that maybe we can have, because this has been a reasonably lengthy conversation on this subject. It might be something we talk about in another video, either or chat about off camera. But I think possibly original Gaslands has an Ameritrash feel to it, in my opinion. It's telling a story of Mad Max and Death Race 2000 and all those sorts of things. And the thing about Mad Max and Death Race 2000 is there's plenty of people you don't want to be in Mad Max and Death Race 2000. Not everybody is Jason Statham. Not everybody is Mel Gibson. Some people turn up, get spaffed in the first 5 seconds and have their life suck. And Gaslands goes, you know what, sometimes you're not the hero of the story. No, you're not always Tom Hardy. Sometimes you're just some poor blood bag. And that's what happens for us to tell the narrative story of Gaslands. And that doesn't always make a smooth, lovely gaming experience for all participants. And I think that's why in board games you've got the Ameritrash Eurogame break, because Eurogames say you're going to have the experience we intended for you no matter what the other people do, because it's essentially multiplayer solitaire or whatever. And Ameritrash goes, you know what, some of your games are going to suck and some of your games are going to be fantastic, and because of how fantastic the fantastic games are, you'll suck it up for the ones that suck. And I think possibly a certain amount of our tinkering at the moment is us going, okay, how can we leaven the sucky bits of the Ameritrash experience of initial Gaslands, and how can we smooth it more for people to be, I don't know, whether it's more Euro-y but just less spiky. But anyway, that's plenty.
Yeah, and I think that like the way that I would re-express that from my perspective is make it as likely as possible that the first time someone interacts with the game, they have a good time. And that, I think, is because it isn't as spiky. It's more consistently creamy.
And I'm certain that this is a squareable circle where it's like the story beats in Gaslands are just fun. They're just out and out fun and everyone loves them. The other bits, the punishments aren't, and I think that they can be tweaked out and smoothed off without losing those story beats. Anyway,
Right.
That's been a conversation about tweaking the evade system in Gaslands. If you enjoyed listening to us have this largely live development discussion about Gaslands, please like and subscribe to the video. If you didn't enjoy it, if you think that our evade system is a load of baloney and all of our fixes are foolish, please tell us why it's baloney, why we are foolish, and how we can do better. And as we mentioned in the last video, these R&D documents are going to be going up live on gaslands.com. They are a living set of rules documents. We're going to be taking feedback on them. If you're a Gaslands player, hell, if you're a games developer or a designer, one assumes if you're watching this channel you might well be, pitch in, read it over, give it some thinks, and tell us what you think of those rules and how they could be adjusted, fixed, and improved. Either way, reach out to us on social media. Until next time, we're going to say goodbye from this episode of Rule of Carnage. So bye.
Bye.
Bye.